Hey Saint, what are Dark Souls 2 invasions like in the year 2025? Well, I'm glad you asked because I have been finding out. I'm going to start this video with a hot take, so excuse that, but it's true and someone has to say it. Dark Souls 2, very different game. And if you've ever tried to get into Dark Souls 2 and maybe you bounced off of it, maybe you asked people, hey, what should I do to, to like this game more? People will tell you to level adaptability because it increases the iframes on your rolls by way of increasing your agility. This is true. But it's also completely overblown, in my opinion. Totally overblown. Attunement will also increase your agility and thus increase your iframes. But yeah, the iframes thing is real, but people overstate its importance, I think. The past 2 or 3 times I've played Dark Souls 2, I have just not leveled adaptability and just learned how to dodge. There's no stat you're going to level up that's going to make this game feel more like Dark Souls 1 or 3 or Elden Ring. There's no stat that's going to do that. Adaptability is a fine tip if you want more iframes on your rolls, but the idea that it is mandatory to do, I totally disagree with. But there, I gave the adaptability breakdown and my opinion on it. Dark Souls 2 PvP is and was and will remain forever. And I don't say this disparagingly, the most Reddit. Okay? This guy I have invaded, he turns his back to me and he's like, oh, just kill me. It's fine. I don't want to fight. But I don't want to just kill him, right? I'm not doing invasions because I have to win the human effigy, right? I'm doing it because I'm trying to have fun. And the biggest victory that I could have is to make this guy also have fun, right? To make him like rethink what invasions are. So I'm going to drop him a human effigy, and it's like, all right, look, no matter what, you're gonna have this. So even if you lose, it's no big deal. In Dark Souls 2, when you die, your maximum health goes down all the way up to a penalty of 50% of your max health. And using a human effigy will fix that, and it will get you back to, your full HP bar. There's a ring you can wear, sort of like Demon Souls, to offset that. Demon Souls has the cling ring. Dark Souls 2 has its version of that. But yeah, this build that I'm using, I showed it off at the beginning of the video. We are doing hexer stuff. So we're casting hexes as both sorceries and incantations. And we're using the Witch Staff to do that. The Witch Staff allows us to cast every type of thing. We can cast sorceries, incantations, hex sorceries, and hex incantations. And that's one of the few, casting catalysts that you can use that will allow you to do that. And so that way you're not having to toggle between all types of different catalysts in order to do it. This staff drops off of I think they're Lydia witches, the Black Lydia witches in the Undead Crypt. The sword I'm using is Blue Flame. It doesn't have a heavy attack. Instead, it has cast spells. So you can cast sorceries, but not hexes, with the sword, which is pretty cool. We're using Scraps of Life, which is a bit like a dark-infused firestorm. We are using Dark Storm, which is like a weird, I don't know what that is, but it knocks people down, and it makes a cool circle of dark stuff around you. We've got Soul Greatsword, Dead Again. I'll go over what these spells do. We have another spell also, but I forget what it's called right now, so I'm just waiting for it to pop up on the screen, and then I will say the name of the other spell that we're using. And this is what attunement gets us. Shockwave is what it's called. Shockwave is a bit like Force from Dark Souls, or Projected Force from Dark Souls 3. It's also, I think that also existed in Dark Souls 1. Yeah, it did. It's also a bit like Wrath from Afar in Elden Ring, except, you know, it's not going to do that much damage. But it will knock people down, and in a game like Dark Souls 2, you know, that's handy. It's also good at breaking your opponent's guard as well. And Reason Dead Again, which turns little dead enemies in the level into explosive traps, which is a cool spell. I really like that. I'll have a better example where I kind of show it off, but there you go. It's cool. And as you can see, it also works on players if they haven't spawned out of the world entirely. So, like, let's say you beat a co-op Phantom. You could cast Dead Again, and if that player isn't unloaded from the world yet, where their corpse was will explode also, which is pretty cool, which is what happened to the host at the end of that invasion there. This host has used a seed of a giant tree, which was a consumable item that you could get in Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3. In Dark Souls 3, it was way nerfed at the end of the game's life cycle. Like, they let that game go for like a year and a half before they heavily nerfed the seed of a giant tree, making it go from like a 3-hour duration to like, you know, like a 45-second duration, which is insane. In Dark Souls 2, it still lasts a really long time. And it doesn't just, you know, in Elden Ring, enemies might hit invaders. They won't target them necessarily, but they can hit them. Dark Souls 2 doesn't have that. But if you use the Seed of a Giant Tree, the enemies will react to the invader and try to hit them. They are actively, like, targeting you, the invader. They will also still try and hit the host. It just depends on who's closer and, you know, who's in range or whatever. So here's some shockwave, and it broke that guy's guard there, as you can see. It's like a ranged kick, or like I said earlier, it's sort of like rejection from Elden Ring. But these invasions in Dark Souls 2, let me preface, I'm not the best Dark Souls 2 PvPer. This is the game I know the least about in terms of PvP, so don't expect me to, like, blow your mind with any crazy secrets or whatever. In terms of, you know, all the Souls games and Elden Ring and even Bloodborne, I know more about all of those PvP games, or the PvP in those games, than I do Dark Souls 2, which is weird, I know, because everybody swears up and down that Dark Souls 2 is the best PvP. You notice I have 60 cracked red eye orbs. There is no red eye orb in Dark Souls 2, the equivalent of which would be like, you know, the recusant finger or the bloody finger. A thing that you can just use forever and have forever. That doesn't exist in Dark Souls 2. There's a mod you can download if you play on PC called Blue Acolyte, I believe, and it will give you just like an infinite amount of invasion items. Basically, it's just one and it never goes away. I used to use that mod. I've used it before, and I didn't get in any sort of like trouble about it. So take that with a grain of salt. It's, you know, use it at your own discretion. But I used it, and I never had any issues. I also used Wex Dust in Dark Souls 3, and again, never had any issues. Dead Again. I love this spell. It's so silly. There's a lot of silly stuff in Dark Souls 2, and it rules. It rules that there's this silly stuff. You'll notice how slow everything feels in terms of like movement and attacks and things. If you unlock and play unlocked more, you can move much faster in Dark Souls 2 PvP. Obviously, the more comfortable you are doing that, the better off you'll be. But in certain situations, like, I don't know what weapon movesets look like that I'm playing against. So I'm staying locked on, and I'm taking it slow, and it's fine, because my opponent is also taking it slow. If I were playing someone who was playing unlocked and moving very fast, I would obviously... I would also go towards that playstyle, even though I'm probably not going to be as good as the person doing it. But it's a very different feeling game entirely, which again kind of goes back to my adaptability point. There's nothing that's going to make this feel like any of the other games. Nothing's going to make this feel like Dark Souls 1 or 3 or Bloodborne or Elden Ring. There's no stat that's just going to magically make you understand Dark Souls 2's movement and everything else. The idea of increasing iframes, like I say, and adaptability, like, it's good and it's fine. But I have base adaptability, and like I can pretty much dodge everything on reaction by just dodging when I'm supposed to, as opposed to, you know, pressing dodge the moment anybody makes any movement at all. You might have noticed my back steps also have iframes, and again, if you level up adaptability, those get better, but I'm able to use those even with base adaptability. It's a really great mechanic that I wish they would do more with, because the idea of having sort of a lesser roll that doesn't take as long to recover from, and that allows you to counterattack faster. If you take that risk, it has less iframes, but if it works out for you, you know, you get a nice counterattack. And unlike other Souls games and Elden Ring, it's not just pierce or thrust damage that has counterattack modifier. Every weapon has a counterattack modifier in Dark Souls 2. And so you can do more damage with that. Another thing worth pointing out here is I'm using a dark infused sword that I have buffed with a dark buff off of my dark infused staff. And so I do 1,000,000 damage with just a single light attack, which is wild. Invaders, this is also worth noting, invaders in Dark Souls 2 can't heal with the flask or items. If you want to heal as an invader in Dark Souls 2, you're going to have to use a spell. Great Heal or Warmth. I hate this aspect of Dark Souls 2. Making this build, it was kind of whatever. I've got, you know, attunement slots, so I can put, you know, and I have faith, so I could put Great Heal on there. Not a big deal. You could cast Warmth with very little, you know, you don't have to do much to get Warmth to cast on a build. But I hate the idea of if you want to make an invader build and you want to be able to heal, you're gonna need to have that. Some sort of spell that can cast a heal. And that's like the term meta that people throw around. Like, that's actually meta. Like, every invader build has to have, or probably should have, some spell for healing. Parries are very different in Dark Souls 2. When you parry someone in Dark Souls 2, they fall flat on their ass and stay there for like a solid 3 or 4 seconds. And you can take a riposte, you know, just like in Elden Ring or, you know, the other Dark Souls games. But you have enough time, if you're a wizard, to like cast a spell instead. So I'm sitting here and I'm doing these invasions, and as a result of that, I get invaded. Even though I've defeated the world boss, and you know, like, there's nowhere for me to go in terms of like go fight a boss, you can still be invaded in Dark Souls 2, which definitely plays a role in keeping activity going. So I'm sitting here trying to do invasions, and instead I get invaded. And that will happen a lot if you decide to do some Dark Souls 2 invasions. After you defeat a boss, a human effigy effect will take place on a bonfire, and you have to nullify that effect. You have to sit down at the bonfire and select Nullify Human Effigy if you would like to invade. When you nullify that human effigy, you can also be invaded. You can just burn a human effigy at a bonfire before you defeat a boss, and you can have that same effect, and you won't get invaded as you play through a level or an area, which is nice for people who don't want to be invaded. But as you are seeing here, I was trying really hard to get Mirror Knight invasions, where you spawn in helping the boss against players who are fighting the boss. So I was like invading in this area, and I keep invading the same people over and over and over again. This is a thing where, you know, in Dark Souls 3 and in Elden Ring, you have this invasion cooldown timer, where after an invasion, you're not going to be invaded for a minute. In Dark Souls 2, there is an invasion cooldown timer, but God, it's so short. It's so very short. And in Dark Souls 2, there are also 2 different types of invaders. There are red invaders, like what I'm doing, and there can also be blue invaders. And they run on separate invasion timers. So just because you're not getting invaded by reds doesn't mean you won't be getting invaded by a blue. which is cool. These are all cool interactions. You know, not a hater of these. They definitely do a lot to keep the activity going. But you can imagine that some of these players are like, oh my god, it's this guy again. Probably sick of seeing me. Understandable. Now myself, as an invader, I'm a big fan of this because it creates like narrative invasions. You might have noticed the guy at the beginning of the video, we invaded him and he was like, just kill me, don't want to fight. And then like the last invasion we had with him, he set a trap for me and hit me with a plunging attack on an elevator. You know, just like a complete 180 in terms of like player engagement. And that's the sort of thing you can appreciate when you invade the same people over and over again, is like the sort of like, you know, this narrative that builds up over the course of these invasions. And that is something that Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3, you know, they have that. And it rules. Dark Souls 1 could also have it, but the problem is you can only be invaded when you have the human effigy active. Dark Souls 2 doesn't require anything like that. And so, as a result, you can see these same players over and over again. With Dark Souls 3, it's a little different, because with Dark Souls 3, what ends up happening is co-opers will use the dried finger item in order to get invaded, in order to summon the maximum number of co-opers that they can. But what that does is it opens up invasions non-stop, essentially. They can be invaded forever. I have a really great video that I will upload after this one that shows off something similar happening in Dark Souls 2, just based off of the invasion timer being shorter and summoning phantoms shortening the invasion time as well, if that makes sense. Just watch the next video that comes out. You'll see what I'm talking about. But yeah, Dark Souls 2 is a very different game in terms of invasions. And people love Dark Souls 2 PvP, but I am not, like I said earlier, this is the one that like I was least knowledgeable of because it is the least interesting to me, which is weird. That's not to say I dislike it, because I like it very much. There's no game by From Software with invasions that I don't do invasions in. You know, I like the mechanic. And as long as that mechanic exists, I will at least learn enough to, you know, try and have some fun. But this sort of thing that you're seeing here, what are we doing? You know, what is this? Why does this have to happen? I don't know. There's, you know, like, there's a better way out of this, I think, if I just roll a bunch. Yeah, there we go. We can kind of kickstart the wizard. But there's a lot of this that you will miss. Elden Ring, being able to just run through enemies. Elden Ring, invading near far. Again, there's a mod for this in Dark Souls 2 if you're playing on PC, Blue Acolyte. It will allow you to invade near far. But like just base game Elden Ring having that is huge. The map marker that Elden Ring gives invaders, so you know which way to go towards a host. Some of these levels in Dark Souls 2, while they might not be big like Elden Ring, they are looping and winding. And there's just, like, some of them have dead ends that you cannot come back from. And so if you go down a dead end, you're just stuck. And that's, you know, you just pray and hope that the host comes to you. But they may not. They might go a different way and find a boss in some other direction. And because there's no map marker or anything to sort of guide you towards the host, funny enough, there was like a cut content item that invaders would have been able to use that would have directed them towards the host. Instead, they gave it to blue phantoms on spawn. Blue phantoms get to look and see where the invader is through a little red eye that takes off from the blue and it will lead them directly to the invader. But I'm pretty sure that there was supposed to be an item that allowed everyone to do that, but I don't think it exists in the finished game. But yeah, it's Dark Souls 2. It's 2025. All of these invasions that you're seeing took place off stream. I just went into every bonfire and I tried to invade. And if I got an invasion, great. If I didn't, I just went to the next bonfire. It took time to, get up all of these clips, but it wasn't like, this was like one evening of invasions. Pretty good activity, honestly. It would be better if I had been streaming, because there'd be stream snipers and stuff like that, but, for just honest, normal activity, this is pretty good. And it's a lot of fun. It's a totally different game, and if you know how to make a build, you can make just the most overpowered noob stompers in existence. And, most players are noobs. That's just, it is what it is. But, yes, it's a lot of fun. The last thing I'll touch on that I guess I should add is soul memory. In Dark Souls 2, you don't matchmake with other players based on your level. It's based entirely on all of the souls you have accrued over the course of your playthrough. As a result, if you don't die a lot, if you don't spend a lot of souls on stuff that's not going to be, like life gems and arrows and upgrading weapons you're not going to use very long, if you don't spend those souls and your opponent did, you're going to have extra levels on your opponent. It's entirely possible you might play through the game, be level 100, max upgrade weapons, and invade somebody who's level 50 with a +6 weapon, and the game just lets that happen because of soul memory. They wasted their souls by dying or buying life gems or whatever. A lot of people make a big deal out of soul memory, but in my opinion, it's really not. I have better activity at a higher soul memory anyway, so I just don't pay any attention to it, and it is what it is. And what it is Dark Souls 2 Invasions in the year 2025. Thanks for watching. Later, y'all.